Hello and welcome back to another video. So Blizzard recently did an AMA over on the WoW subreddit, so it's probably worth just talking about it here. There was actually a great deal of interesting discussion going on, and first of all, just thank you to Wowhead for providing basically just a summary of what Blizzard said. That's categorized. It has saved me a lot of time in parsing, so yeah, that's very awesome. Now in this video I'm just going to go through the main points that I thought was interesting. I've tried to cut out the fluff where I can, but I will cover pretty much everything and give you my thoughts. So let's just dive into it and first of all talk about some general things. So firstly, the Heirloom Collection system is planned for patch 6.1.0. This should be pretty handy, and essentially you will just unlock an heirloom on your character, and then it will be available to anyone else on your account. I think that's really awesome, and well, I think that's what it's going to be anyway. They didn't specifically mention it here, but that's what they've talked about in the past for the Heirloom Collection system. Now there is a little bit of bad news here. The transmog system that they were talking about is actually going back to the next expansion. Now this transmog system was supposed to be a little bit like Diablo 3's, in which you would just unlock a look, and once that look was unlocked you wouldn't really have to bother about the items anymore. That would have been really handy, and yeah, a bit unfortunate that it's being pushed back, but I guess that's just how development goes. Now the next thing that was talked about was versatility and stats in general. So they said that they don't think they've really accomplished their goal with stats. Overall they wanted to strike a balance with item variety, but perhaps ended up having too many secondary stats. I absolutely think that this is true, and we've ended up with this bizarre system where so much of the gear that drops for you is utterly useless. It's really strange. I might do a video on it at some point, but I don't know, it's just a bit of a problem, and certainly adding too many secondary stats, especially pointless ones that are boring like versatility, just doesn't add any fun to the system, and it adds more variables that could go against you, which kinda sucks. Now on the topic of no flying, they said that it's going to remain in patch 6.1 because the content of 6.1 will mainly be focused on the main Draenor zones. Basically, they're not doing a random island that's separate to the main world like the Isle of Thunder or the Timeless Isle. They also mentioned something about mob pathing. I wasn't aware of this, but as it turns out, some server-side responsiveness improvements have basically changed the feel of mob pathing, which is especially noticeable for tanks. There's no fix for it yet, but it is on their radar. Sounds like that could be kind of annoying. Anyway, the next thing to talk about is Apexis crystals and the stats from the gear that it gives you. So they said that in hindsight, they think it might have been a good idea to do random stats on the Apexis gear. Now I've got to assume that there would also be some sort of reroll item that you could buy. Honestly, I think this would just lead to even more stat-based frustration. There's so many secondary stats that with randomness, it's just far too easy to get a bit of gear that's really not that useful for you at all. I mean, come on, we're already at the situation where, some heroic dungeon gear is better than, say, 640 gear because of the way stats are really being handled. Honestly, I think it's okay to just have Apexis crystals being a slow but reliable way to get gear that is definitely useful for your character. The one problem that we currently have with Apexis gear is that perhaps, I don't know, maybe 3 of the 5 slots might not be viable because of the secondary stats that they have. Bit odd in that way, but whatever, that's just how things have panned out. I think that it's been a bit problematic in that some classes, every spec gets a passive 5% bonus to a certain secondary stat, so if a bit of gear doesn't have that secondary stat, it's a little bit annoying, and it's just bizarre when it's a preset, set of gear like the Apexis stuff. So yeah, it's a bit weird. Then finally, on the topic of just sort of general stuff, they said that the class accessory system is still alive and will be hopefully there in a future expansion. If you don't know what that was, it was a thing that could say let hunters have quivers, rogues have vials of poison, and maybe like paladins have like a little, tomb or something strapped to them. Basically just little trinkets and cool things that were purely visual. So yeah, that's apparently a thing for a future expansion. Now that that general stuff's being talked about, it's time to move on to Garrisons. So, first of all, on the topic of alts, they said that they're planning on making things a bit easier for alts in Garrisons throughout the patch cycle. I think this is great. I've got 2 alts that are level 100, and 2 that are like in and around level 95, 96. And already it's getting to be hard enough sort of keeping all those plates spinning, so I can't imagine what it's going to be like when I've got, say, maybe 6 or 7 level 100 alts. Though I guess not everyone is in that position where they've got so many characters to deal with. Still though, Garrisons are certainly a lot of work with alts, and it would be nice if they would just come up with some way of fixing that up. Next, they also talked about the lack of missions at level 100. Basically, they originally designed it so that at level 100, you wouldn't get completely spammed with bad missions. By the way, this is once you have your followers geared and stuff like that. However, they didn't plan on the salvage yard being so OP, and they do agree that there is a problem here and they are thinking about it. There's a bit of a problem right now where you kind of don't get as many salvage crates, because at level 100, once your followers are geared up, well, you just get less missions, and the chance of getting a salvage crate from a level 100 mission and a level 95 mission is the same. So I suppose that ideally what you want to do is have mostly level 100 followers, but then have a few lower level ones in there, just to keep the system spawning you missions so that you can grind out salvage crates. Certainly though, it does seem like a little bit of an oversight on their part, and hopefully they just come up with some way of making that work out. Now, the other thing that they talked about was art. And as far as multiple versions of the Garrison go, like say having a Night Elf one and an Orc one, well, we already have an Orc one, a Troll one, and just various racial ones, they said that it would be nice, but ultimately it would directly take away from other content, because the Garrison art is made by the same team who do the art for dungeons and raids. And they said, though, that if they do a Garrison-like system again in a future expansion, that multiple versions of the art will be a priority. I think that's definitely it's the right thing to do now, and it's the right thing to say for the future, and hopefully they would come up with a system that perhaps would be a little bit more well-balanced in terms of the art workflow if they decide to do multiple versions. Now, the next thing they talked about is something that was personally concerning me and quite a few others, and it's the level 3 salvage yard. So a lot of us have been concerned that the level 3 yard is worse at giving follower upgrades. As it turns out, though, this isn't the case. The level 3 yard has got the exact same chance of giving you follower upgrades, just that it also gives you basically like a second roll at an additional loot table, which can contain transmog items and some rarer things. So hopefully that's working as intended, and what they say there is the case. I know that since this comment I have upgraded my salvage yard to level 3, and I'm still getting a decent amount of follower upgrades. The next thing they talked about was music, and they said that they are planning on coming up with a way of you being able to use custom music in your Garrison at patch 6.1. I think this is really good because, well, especially for the Alliance Garrison, the music is just overbearing. The Garrison's supposed to be a kind of chilled out place where you, well, chill out, so having this really, really loud, punchy music it just kind of grates in your ears after a while, so I'm glad that they've decided to hopefully alleviate that problem. There's some nice, just relaxed music when you're inside your town hall. Perhaps they could just play that more often when you're in the Garrison, or just always play it, or, come up with a better system. I suppose letting us choose what we want is really the best thing, because people can just do whatever suits them. Then, on the topic of the mobile armory having Garrison support, they said that Garrison support will, well, not happen. Basically, Garrisons are intended as a Warlords of Draenor only feature, and there are other more long-term improvements to the app that can be made instead. That's interesting. I'm definitely, well, I'm up for hearing what these improvements are at some point, because it seems like the mobile app hasn't really had too much love in quite a while. Next, they talked about minecarts. Essentially, the minecarts are showing up without a mining follower because of a bug on Blizzard's end. So, yeah, that's a little bit strange. Certainly, the one thing I would say is with the carts, there's these items you can get, they're like a pickaxe and a thing of coffee, and the pickaxe allows you to mine in the mine a little bit faster, and the coffee lets you run faster in the mine. However, it only stacks up to 5, and it's just kind of annoying, so maybe if that could stack up to 20 or 30, it would be pretty nice. Now, they also talked a little bit about models during the AMA. They said that they do have some planned tweaks to the models coming up, and this includes a potential Night Elf male animation refinement for patch 6.1. I think that's absolutely necessary, as the Night Elf run animation, for the males anyway, just looks absolutely silly. Now, they also said that they do want to do pets, moonkin, and bears, but the main focus for this expansion was the player models, so it does sound like that's going to happen at a later date. Now that that's been covered, it's time to talk about dungeons and raids. So on the topic of the Group Finder and LFR, they said that they've got some ideas in mind for allowing the Group Finder stuff, and the LFR stuff, I suppose, to foster longer-term relationships. I don't know how they do that, but certainly there are some cool ideas. For an example, maybe they could build up some system where they could, say, have an index of how much you know another player, and then maybe have some sort of database that contains sort of mutual friends and maybe people that you have both talked to, and basically the more social links players potentially could have, then they could group those players together, or at least prioritize grouping those players together. That would mean that you'd be more likely to run into the same person on multiple runs, and assuming there's a positive interaction there, that could end up working out pretty well. Of course, anything like this would have to be done in a way that would not increase group times, or queue times even, because queue times are extremely annoying. But on the topic of queue times, they did say that they may allow 6 DPS in dungeons, and then use their scaling tech to allow it to work for both 5 and 6 player groups. I think that would be great, and I know that as a DPS player, mainly, it's kind of annoying when you've got like a 30-minute queue, whereas tanks and healers are instant. So if per every tank and healer you could deal with another DPS, then that should increase queue times, or sorry, decrease queue times by quite a bit. And then finally, they did talk a little bit about scenarios, and said that they don't anticipate having queued scenarios for Warlords of Draenor. I think that's good, because while they were just a handy thing that you could go in and do, ultimately the reward wasn't that great, and the content itself was definitely quite lackluster. The heroic scenarios were a little bit better though, so maybe there's some potential in a system like that. They also said that the last boss in Warlords of Draenor is going to involve some sort of large surprise that we will hear about soon. That's definitely interesting to hear. It's, I think, really what they said in the past, so we'll have to wait and see what they actually come up with. There could be some really crazy stuff. There was this leak about the Eye of Ashara expansion that involved Khadgar getting really desperate about something, then talking to Chromie, and then us recovering Alt-Universe Illidan, which is weird, and I hope that doesn't happen, but hey, as long as some cool Burning Legion hijinks happens, I suppose I'll be pretty happy. So with all that stuff covered, I'm just going to quickly go over the main points that they touched on with PvP. There's a lot of stuff in there that I can't really add to, so this is kind of just the main stuff. Now, they said that they don't think that healing in general, as an idea, just as a thing, is OP in PvP. However, they do feel that currently a few spells are too strong. They also think that perhaps people get too fixated on the healing done scoreboard and forget that healing is only one kind of defense. For an example, say mitigation is extremely important, and something like Warrior's damage mitigation also plays a significant role. So that's what they said on that. I think that sometimes healing can, just because it's such a clear system that you can see happen and see react to you, it can just be very frustrating from a player's perspective, whereas something with like damage mitigation often is just a thing that you don't really see, other than perhaps a number being smaller, whereas with healing it's like, yeah, I was about to kill that guy and now the health bar is larger so I can't, and that gets frustrating. Now, they also talked a little bit about racials in PvP, and they said that they are actually balanced in their opinion. And the main driver behind race representation at the high level is social, and that's basically the way this all plays out kind of leads to false opinions and stuff like that. Top PvP players, as they said, tend to play together, and therefore end up being on the same faction. Last season, EU PvPers were mainly Alliance, and the top US PvPers were mainly Horde. This kind of meant that when people looked at the high-end teams, when they were trying to select what race to be, or, you know, what racial they thought was the best or the worst, they just kind of saw this, and this was mainly because of social reasons, not actual balance reasons. So that's Blizzard's 2 cents on that. I think that does make quite a lot of sense, and I guess I am happy enough with racials, though I've got to imagine that 1 or 2 of them are definitely going to edge forward in most scenarios. And if you look at PvP, I mean, come on, the human one's got to be pretty strong in relation to other things. All that said, I don't know enough about how it affects things and trinkets and all that stuff, so I can't really give too much of a worthwhile opinion on that. Next, on the topic of Ashran, they said that they are definitely working on some of the various issues and bugs, especially with Chronos. They also think that they haven't educated players enough about the benefits of the outer areas of the zone, and actually, interestingly, on that topic, they said that there's an idea for automatically raid grouping people based on the area of Ashran that they're in. I think that could be pretty cool for just, I don't know, keeping a bit of a zone-based or a like sub-zone-based chat room going on. Kind of cool. Now, as far as balance goes, they said that it's getting, you know, it's quite challenging because they don't just have a server that they can dump Ashran onto and then pluck players from other servers to make a perfectly balanced Ashran. So what they generally have to do is match up servers, and that's quite tricky because in the West, there is a general PvP Horde bias. And in fact, I think it was either in China or just Asia as a whole, there's a strong bias towards the Horde for everything. So it's kind of tricky for them to do, and I guess they're just working on it. Now, they also said that they are aware of just some design problems with Ashran, and that making content of this nature is very hard. I think that's absolutely true, and yes, there are design problems, and I still hold by, or, stand behind, that's the word, I still stand behind some of the design criticisms that I sort of aimed at Ashran back during the beta testing process. Though they definitely did make a good bit of progress during the beta since I made those comments, so it's not as bad as it used to be, but hey, it's still not perfect. Now also, they said that they're working on a low-level experience fix to Battlegrounds, but it might not be ready until patch 6.1. So there you go, that's basically the Q&A covered. If you want to read things in specific, then you can check out the r/wow subreddit or MMOChampion/wowhead, because they both have rundowns of what happened on their front pages. Overall, I think it was a great AMA, and this is a really, really great format for developers to be able to sit down and talk to players. I think we definitely got better answers in comparison to most of the structured Q&A sessions that Blizzard have done before, so hopefully they consider doing this again in the future. Anyway, that's it for the video. Thanks for watching. Let me know what you thought about the various things that they talked about in this AMA, and I will see you next time.